It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Hammers and screwdrivers to fix faulty weapons. Sky News witnesses the Ukrainian army outgunned by Russia 2 years after the invasion. At the United Nations, foreign ministers stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine as Lord Cameron insists the world cannot falter or fail. That's after President Putin honoured fallen Russian soldiers, and both a reward and an ultimatum were issued after the death of Alexei Navalny. Also tonight, a World War II bomb is disposed of in the Sea off Plymouth after what's described as one of the country's biggest ever peacetime evacuations.
You'd have thought that something that's that old couldn't cause that much damage, but obviously it could do, so it's better to be safe.
I've got to be honest, it's a bit mad, isn't it?
She fled the UK to join Islamic State. Today, Shamima Begum was told she must stay in a camp in northern Syria. Plus, a very royal thank you, the King's response to thousands of cards and messages of support sent after his cancer diagnosis. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages, and they're in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. We must not let this stand. The words of Foreign Secretary David Cameron this evening as he addressed the United Nations Security Council almost 2 years since Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. It's become a war of attrition with only small territorial gains and at a huge cost to both sides. Tens of thousands have been killed, soldiers and civilians. Ukraine has managed to continue fighting because of the grit of its people and because of financial and military support from the West. The appetite to help is waning, though, especially in the United States, where billions in aid is being held up in Congress. And inside Ukraine, Russian forces control large parts of the east and have set their sights on the country's second largest city, Kyiv. We'll hear from Lord Cameron in a moment, but first, our international correspondent John Sparks has seen firsthand how a lack of ammunition is hampering efforts to protect the front line.
You can't see the Russians massing in the forest, but you certainly know they're there. Tens of thousands gathering in the trees, something the members of Ukraine's 32nd Brigade could never match. They took us to a command center a few kilometers from the front, east of the city of Kharkiv. And we found long faces and hard stares in their cabin.
They are storming us, breaching the barbed wire, so they can pass right through.
The Russians used to assault their positions once or twice a day, but now the attacks are continuous.
At the moment, for every shell that Ukraine fires, how many come back from the Russians?
1 to 10.
1 to 10. 1 to 10.
Their drones capture the imbalance. Here, a Russian vehicle runs into a mine. Their soldiers scurry to the trees. But they know the enemy will return. The numbers are in their favor.
They have their aircraft, helicopters, planes, laser bombs, grads. They use everything along our front line.
They've told us we've got to move out. It's too dangerous. Cluster bombs, mortar fire, artillery. The forest is alive with this stuff, and they've told us to go.
President Zelensky is desperate to rearm the Ukrainian military, but the members of this anti-tank unit were trying to make their only weapon work. Screwdrivers and a hammer deployed to bring a Soviet-era bazooka back to life. Something they achieved eventually.
Most of the time it works, but sometimes we have problems.
The commander uses it to fire at Russian troops and says it can be deadly. Problem is, he's barely got any grenades. Have you got enough ammunition?
No, not enough. We've got enough for 12, 13, 15 minutes. That's it.
After 12 minutes, after that?
We'll take an AK and shoot with it.
The pressure here is building, as is the collective cost. We met a family dentist, now charged with evacuating casualties from the front line. But many don't survive, he says. It's taking too long to reach them.
This is due to the mortar fire, the shelling. Sometimes it's impossible to reach their positions. It can take 2 or 3 days, even more.
The dentist dragged the body of a 43-year-old soldier to this medical center. The remains of a 49-year-old followed later. There are no good days here, he told me. A generation of Ukrainians are dying on the battlefield. Their fellow citizens are trying to hold the line. John Sparks, Sky News in Kyiv region.
And it's because of those shortcomings on the battlefield that Lord Cameron insisted tonight that countries could not falter or fail in their support for Ukraine.
So my question to Putin is simple. Why? His government claims this to be a battle between brothers. What twisted form of brotherhood is this for which so many lives must be ruined? How is Russia living up to its responsibilities as a permanent member of this council to uphold international peace and security? And how many ridiculous explanations have we now had for this invasion? Are they criminals or are they fellow Russians? 1 minute Ukraine is an existential threat, the next we're told it doesn't exist. Are you fighting stooges of NATO or Nazis? The only people behaving like Nazis are the Putin regime, invading another country and hoping the world will be weak and let you get away with it. If we give in to the idea that one country can invade another with impunity, then we will be left in a dreadful situation where any country could face a similar fate. Respect for sovereignty lies at the heart of the international system, at the heart of the United Nations. Nothing matters more to its members than having our borders treated as inviolable. And that's why nothing should matter more to us than seeing Putin fail. We must not falter. We must stand firm.
And our US correspondent Mark Stone is at the United Nations in New York. And Mark, strong words from Lord Cameron there and a big show of support for Ukraine as well.
Yes, this was the first time that David Cameron has addressed the Security Council as Foreign Secretary. Of course, he's been here many times as Prime Minister, and I did get the sense that he carried a confidence with him and appeared to hold that chamber as he made that statement. What was really striking, as we saw behind me here a little earlier on, so many foreign ministers, most of them from Europe, gathered around Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba. There was an effort to show unity, but behind that they know that 2 years into this war, 2 years after Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, yes, they have avoided a much bigger conflict. And remember, there was so much concern about World War III, about nuclear war. They have avoided that, but they know that Putin has the upper hand. That much was demonstrated so clearly in John's report. And the problem is here in America. Down in Washington, a Trumpian wing of the Republican Party is blocking funding, American funding, key American funding for Ukraine. And I think it was striking to me, certainly, that the messaging here from the UN, from the foreign ministers this time, 2 years on, was not to Russia, it was to America. To say to America, you need to fund Ukraine, otherwise Vladimir Putin will win.
OK, Mark, thank you. The family of the Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, have offered a reward of €50,000 for information about his death. Mr. Navalny's mother says she's been given an ultimatum to agree to a secret funeral for her son or see him buried in the penal colony in which he died. Russian authorities insist the politician died from natural causes. Here's our Moscow correspondent, Dana Magnay.
This post from Dasha Navalnaya 1 week after her father's death, of her family in happier times. Love, kisses, hugs, and miss you very much, she writes. Her grandmother, Ludmila, has been handed the cruelest of ultimatums. Agree to a secret burial or his body will be buried at the prison colony. Her deadline to choose, just 3 hours. Video appeals have been flooding social media. Russia's opposition luminaries, most of them in exile, demanding Navalny's body be returned to his mother so she can give her son a proper burial. But as is always the way with Russia, these are easily ignored. Vladimir Putin did pay his respects today, but not for Alexei Navalny, never for the one man who challenged him beyond all others. This was at the tomb of the unknown soldier for Defender of the Fatherland Day, a national holiday to honour Soviet troops killed in World War II and those who are fighting now.
Russian soldiers and officers continue the glorious military traditions in dignity. At the forefront today are participants of the special military operation. You fight for truth and justice, show courage and bravery in defending Russia.
At a military museum just outside Moscow, we attended the same parade we'd watched 2 years earlier, just before Putin had invaded Ukraine. And the views have stayed pretty similar.
The special military operation was necessary because if Ukraine, the Ukrainian army, shelled civilians, of course they needed to be protected.
He tells me he thinks Navalny died of natural causes and isn't sure anyway what he was fighting for.
I don't know what kind of freedom he wanted. I don't delve into politics.
And being not into politics is a pretty standard response. Vladimir Putin has always marshalled patriotism and a warped sense of history and given the people something to latch onto, even as he has stripped them of all political agency. And it was that which Alexei Navalny was up against, not just the Putin regime, but also the passive acquiescence of the people. But the grief this week from those who did love and believe in Alexei Navalny was plain to see. And the authorities' cruelty now will only confirm in their minds Navalny's old rallying cry that Russia must one day be free. Diana Magne, Sky News, Moscow.
Thousands of residents in Plymouth are returning to their homes tonight after a delicate and dangerous operation to remove an unexploded World War bomb found in a back garden. Bomb dispersal experts loaded the device onto a military convoy and drove it slowly through deserted streets before placing it on an inflatable boat and carefully lowering it into the sea. Sabah Chowdhury reports.
It marked the end to a tense military operation. A 500-kilogram Nazi bomb driven slowly through the streets of Plymouth, taken out to sea for disposal.
It's been a huge operation. We know it started a few days ago now. The decision was made to move the device, which meant we then had to extend the cordon on the route down to the ferry where it was ultimately taken out to sea. Everyone's been really good. We know it's taken a huge amount of effort on their parts, and they've been really patient and understanding.
A nerve-wracking ordeal for thousands of local residents, warned the device could still explode at any moment.
I guess it's people sort of scared for their property, really. I think there's that nerve on, are we insured, are we not insured if anything was to happen?
You'd have thought that something that's that old couldn't cause that much damage, but obviously it could do, so it's better to be safe than sorry.
The explosive was discovered in the back garden of a home in Kyiv. After days of assessment and the evacuation of more than 1,000 homes, experts made the call to remove the device. The bomb was located here on St. Michael's Avenue. It was carried by a lorry through the streets of Plymouth to the Tor Point Ferry slipway. Residents inside this exclusion zone were asked to leave out of fear for their safety. It was then transported out past the Plymouth breakwater with plans to be detonated. A complex task, fraught with danger.
Moving it is the most dangerous part, but you know it's what damage it would cause if you leave it in place and blow it up, or if you're going to take it somewhere else and blow up.
All these houses were urged to evacuate by emergency services, so it's no surprise that the Ministry of Defence are calling this the largest peacetime evacuation operation since World War II. Some managed to find novelty in the chaos.
We didn't know where to go, so we just brought the kids up here to have a little play around, like, you know. But I've got to be honest, it's a bit mad, isn't it? I know it sounds bad. We've got some chocolate bars and crisps.
Some cake bars, just as it's a few drinks, just to keep the kids going for a little bit, yes.
Snacks, right, yeah.
Evacuation picnic. Yes.
Meanwhile, back on the road where the bomb was discovered, the army are now on a clear-up mission. And residents are moving back in, including the homeowners of this property where the bomb was first discovered. The dug-up garden, the only evidence of their nightmare ordeal. For now, military, emergency services and thousands of residents can breathe a sigh of relief. Sabah Chowdhury, Sky News in Plymouth.
Well, Becky Cottrell is in Plymouth for us tonight. Becky, a very dramatic day. Do we know when the bomb will be detonated?
Well, we were told earlier this evening that it would be within 24 hours. So could that be tonight? Could that be tomorrow? We just don't know. I think many people are here are hoping it will happen in the daytime because they'd like to try and catch a glimpse of it. We don't really know what that moment of detonation will look like, but people are hoping for sort of dramatic plumes of water coming out of the sea. Now, we've been told that the bomb must be taken at least 14 metres below sea level. Then a diver will place an explosive charge on the device before moving away, and then it's basically a question of pressing go on detonation when the conditions are just so. And we know that weather conditions have to be right, and we think that's one of the reasons that detonation has been delayed so far. More than 100 Army and Navy personnel are involved in this operation. One of the things that they had to establish was the condition of the bomb, particularly the fuse, how degraded it is. It's been 80 or so years since it was dropped, and depending on the condition of the fuse meant whether they could detonate it at the property where it's found, that would have been catastrophic for the people living nearby, or detonated at sea. They decided it was safe enough to move the device very carefully out to sea, and now really we're just waiting for that moment that it will be exploded.
OK, Becky, thanks for the update. Lawyers for the runaway Islamic State bride, Shamima Begum, say they'll keep fighting after the 24-year-old lost a legal challenge over the removal of her British citizenship. It was revoked by a former Home Secretary in 2019. Appeal judges ruled today that that decision was lawful. But her supporters argue the legal system should consider the evidence that she was groomed and trafficked. Here's our Home Editor, Jason Farrell.
Shamima Begum was 15 years old when she fled home and married an Islamic State fighter, emerging 4 years later in a camp in northern Syria, wanting to come home. But the government revoked her British citizenship, and protracted battles against that decision through high and Supreme Courts have led to this.
Our only task is to assess whether the deprivation decision was unlawful. We have concluded it was not, and the appeal is dismissed.
The original Appeal Commission judgment said the case of Shamima Begum versus the Secretary of State is about fundamental principles of the highest importance that have existed ever since the Magna Carta, the right not to be outlawed or exiled, set against the government's duty to uphold and safeguard the security of the United Kingdom.
The government says she is responsible for her own actions, joining a terrorist group. And although a special Immigration Appeal Commission found last year that there was credible suspicion she may have been trafficked to Syria for sexual exploitation, the judges today ruled that that doesn't outweigh the government's right to ban her return on security grounds.
Outside court, her lawyers vowed to continue the fight.
I'm sorry to Shamima and to her family that after 5 years of fighting, she still hasn't received justice in a British court, and to promise her and to promise the government that we're not going to stop fighting until she does get justice, until she is safely back home.
And so here she remains in Al-Roj camp in northern Syria, where Sky News met her in 2021.
I didn't fit into my community or my family, so I felt like I was going somewhere where I could, be accepted more for who I was.
What were the promises of coming here?
Paradise, basically. And it was actually hell on earth.
It's a world away from her former home in rainy Bethnal Green, where some argue the public would be better protected by an inquiry into how she and 3 other schoolmates were radicalised, and by who.
We have failed in a duty of care towards young people. We never called for a public inquiry. These people are still amongst us and we don't know who they are. Was it a youth worker? Was it a teacher? Did she meet some outside? Was it a learning mentor? Was it a counsellor? We just don't know.
She remains in limbo, in squalor. The government says UK security is its priority. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Shamima now lives alongside hundreds of former Islamic State families in northern Syria. Authorities there fear extremist ideology is still thriving in the 2 camps, describing the situation as a ticking time bomb. The 2 settlements are located in Al-Roj and Al-Hol. Our special correspondent Alex Crawford visited both camps and sent this report.
To enter the detention camps of northeast Syria is to enter ISIS territory. The guards are heavily armed and frequently attacked. It's here that Islamic State families still live, nearly 5 years after the terror group was defeated, and where the authorities say ISIS ideology and radicalisation is alive and thriving.
It's known as the most dangerous camp in the world, with the highest known gathering of ISIS supporters or sympathisers left. This area in Zone 5 is so dangerous, it's known locally as the Caliphate.
There are frequent raids by the security forces to smash the ISIS networks and sleeper cells which keep springing up. This was earlier this month at Al-Hol. Dozens of ISIS agitators were arrested in this raid. There are tens of thousands of people here in Al-Hol and in the second camp, Al-Roj. A stash of weapons was also uncovered, some hidden in small tunnels or dugouts in between the tents. Those inside the camp live in squalid, basic conditions, vulnerable to the rampant violence as well as the extreme weather. Breeding grounds for radicalisation, the authorities say, with the thousands of children held here, seen as obvious recruits, as cubs of the IS Caliphate. Human rights groups claim, whatever their background, the residents are unlawfully detained without trial and kept in dangerous conditions.
Hello. Hi. Salam alaikum.
But Westerners are viewed with suspicion.
Gone out the back, quick.
And few want to talk.
She squeezed through a tunnel.
Those who do, like this woman, tell me she doesn't even feel 10% safe. We're scared of everything, she says, frightened for our children with no medical help. And alongside Shamima Begum, who ran away from London to join ISIS while still a schoolgirl, there are about 40,000 other foreign nationals in the 2 camps. The Kurdish authorities insist their allies among the 80 countries who fought ISIS now need to help them with security and take back their own nationals.
The ISIS prisons and camps have become a way that ISIS can re-establish themselves. And in the camps, you've got a whole new generation trained in ISIS ideology, methods and way of life. It's a ticking time bomb which can explode at any time.
Children make up the bulk of the camps, 60% of them, many born from forced marriages and rape, left to languish in dangerous camps with no proper education. Easy prey for ISIS recruiters. Alex Crawford, Sky News in northeast Syria.
More than 1.4 million NHS operations and appointments have been cancelled because of NHS strikes. And from 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, junior doctors will stage a 5-day walkout, likely causing more widespread disruption in England. The British Medical Association says the government failed to make an improved pay offer. Here's our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is a full clinic today.
It doesn't look like it, but this is one of the most important and stressful hospital jobs during strike days. Melissa leads the team that cancels and rearranges operations.
It's not always easy to deal with those calls. There's a lot of frustration there. There's a lot of anger there. These patients have been waiting quite a long time, especially routine patients, for their appointments. And as you can appreciate, those conversations can get quite heated and quite difficult.
Every strike day brings huge upheaval and uncertainty, and patients like George have had enough.
I think they're disgusting. I think they are disgusting, lazy so-and-sos.
Are you worried about the impact the strikes have on patient services? Because
yes,
you need the NHS.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
By almost every metric, this winter is proving to be more challenging than the last. And covering for striking colleagues brings pressure that is felt beyond the strike days.
The cost is seen later on. That might be with extra clinics or extra theatres being required, perhaps out of hours, and the cost to pay for those teams. But also, of course, the most important cost is with our patients, suffering longer in pain or waiting for a diagnosis.
Over 1.3 million hospital appointments have had to be rescheduled since the industrial action began over a year ago. The striking junior doctors enjoyed strong support at the start, but it does feel like that might be changing.
According to the latest opinion polls, over half the UK population still supports the junior doctors' strikes. But spend some time here and speak to staff at almost every level, and you can sense that the mood is beginning to change. The one word that keeps coming up time and time again is frustration, and that's also being felt by patients.
Recess call. The government and the doctors' union, the BMA, seem no closer to any breakthrough. But everyone agrees that the longer these strikes drag on, the more lasting the damage will be. Ashish Joshi, Sky News at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading.
At least 9 people have died after a fire ripped through 2 residential buildings in Valencia. Officials in the city say 1 person is still missing. The fire started on Thursday evening. The cause is not yet known, but experts have suggested a type of cladding might have made the fire spread faster. Police say 3 children found dead in Bristol all died from knife injuries. The bodies of 7-year-old Faraz Bash, his 3-year-old sister Juri, and their 9-month-old baby brother Mohammed were found in a property in the city last weekend. A 42-year-old woman arrested on suspicion of murder remains in custody. The Metropolitan Police have confirmed that the body recovered from the River Thames earlier this week is that of Abdul Azadi. A large manhunt was launched for Mr. Azadi after he was suspected of attacking his ex-partner and her children in a chemical attack in Clapham last month. A man who piloted a boat in the English Channel has been sentenced to 9.5 years for the manslaughter of 4 migrants who drowned when it got into difficulty. Ibrahima Ba, a Senegalese migrant, had offered to steer the dinghy in exchange for a free crossing. It's the first conviction of its kind, as Sadia Chowdhury reports.
4 people died and the blame shared widely. Human rights groups say it is the government that failed to provide safe routes for these people seeking asylum. The government says gangs of human traffickers exploited and profited from them. Today, a judge ordered this man to pay. Ibrahima Bah is a Senegalese asylum seeker. He was steering the boat when it sank, and for that he's been sentenced to 9.5 years in detention. This is the boat. The judge described it as wholly inadequate and not remotely seaworthy for a channel crossing. No wonder then that in just 30 minutes in the sea, it started to sink. In his sentencing remarks, the judge cited a Court of Appeal decision that had made a distinction between the gangs who organise these crossings and supply the boats and are therefore much more highly culpable, and those who merely steer the boats and have no other culpability. The judge noted that this was also a tragedy for Ibrahima Bah. He was described as a man of good character who was under pressure to pilot the boat. We heard that he'd stayed on the boat while others were rescued, and that he watched his own friend tragically die before him. The impact of that trauma on him not lost on his supporters today.
Free Ibrahima Bah! Free Ibrahima Bah!
They accuse the government of failing in its duty of care over a teenage survivor of a shipwreck seeking refuge.
It begs belief that people can think that this is a criminal act, when in fact, without him, so many more people would have died.
The very fact that he, as a survivor of the shipwreck, was arrested is already an injustice in the first place.
Ibrahima Bah is to serve his sentence in a young offenders institute. His accurate age isn't known. Meanwhile, the criminals behind this and other tragedies remain at large. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News, at the Canterbury Crown Court in Kent.
He received thousands of get-well cards. Some, he said, moved him to tears. Today, Buckingham Palace released details of well wishes sent to King Charles after his cancer diagnosis. And as our royal correspondent Laura Bundock reports, some led to much-needed royal mirth.
For the second time in a week, a glimpse of the King. Filmed by the palace and released on royal social media, these are some of the 7,000 letters and cards he's been sent. And every day in his red boxes, among the state paperwork, a selection of cards included. The messages of support are, he says, the greatest comfort.
The Prime Minister, Your Majesty.
Earlier in the week, the King spoke publicly for the first time since starting cancer treatment.
Really wonderful to see you looking so well. No, it's all done by mirrors.
Allowing cameras to film the first minute of his audience with the Prime Minister.
No, because I've had so many wonderful messages and cards, and I can imagine. It's reduced me to tears most of the time. Well, I can imagine. But
it is highly unusual to see this private meeting. But while all public-facing duties are postponed, the palace keen to show the constitutional work continues. Other senior royals are carrying on and ready to step up if needed. But these behind-the-scenes moments are a reminder it's anything but business as usual. From the King, though, reading his cards while recuperating, the message was simple. Thank you. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, and Guardian columnist Zoe Williams. Welcome to you both. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the I newspaper, their headline: UK offers Russian citizens British citizenship to defect and pass secrets to MI6. Stay with us for more. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. On the second anniversary of the war in Ukraine, the Foreign Secretary has told the United Nations countries must not falter or fail in their support for Kyiv. A World War II bomb has been disposed of in the Sea off Plymouth after what's been described as one of the country's biggest ever peacetime evacuations. And Shamima Begum, who fled the UK to marry an ISIS fighter, has lost her appeal against the removal of her British citizenship. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams, and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Daily Telegraph leads with comments by the Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, that she would back the decriminalisation of abortion. The Eye carries a story on Russian officials being offered British citizenships to pass on secrets for MI6. The Express looks at Dame Esther Ranson's campaign to force a vote on assisted dying with what she describes as a positive step forward. Plot to target Parliament headlines on the front of the Times as pro-Palestinian activists tried to force the House of Commons into lockdown. The Sun has an exclusive with Spice Girl Mel B on how she had to budget shop to survive. King and the Tonic headlines. King and Tonic, actually. That's the Daily Mirror, as the King reads well-wishing cards from all across the world. Vile cat killer who went on to murder is on the front of the Daily Mail. The Financial Times leads with the stocks on a group of European businesses dubbed the granolas. Spag bol and not Sunday roast. The Daily Star leads on the country's favourite meals. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons. Welcome again to you both. Let's start with the Telegraph. Have a look at the front page there, and coming up to the second anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We're reading that Britain's to spend £250 million on artillery shells for Ukraine. We know that they are lacking, woefully lacking in our artillery. They have the will and the people to fight, but the ammunition not apparent at the moment. Zoe.
It's very interesting, this, because there's been a sense for almost the entire 2 years that the Ukrainians were doing surprisingly well against the Russians, but over time, their advantage, their size advantage, their money advantage, the development of their military advantage would begin to tell. And yet the international community still seems really surprised that it's begun to tell. I mean, you know, the Ukrainians have effectively run out of weapons and Russia has not run out of weapons. And it's only now that they're having serious conversations in kind of semi-public domains about what the ramifications would be if Ukraine is completely vanquished and what that would mean for the rest of Europe and for NATO. You know, this is... Putting the shell factories on a war footing is less seismic, to my mind, than 2 weeks ago when the kind of armchair generals were talking about national service for Britain's young men. That was much more chilling. But it does seem that every country is going to be expected to do its part, certainly on the weapons front.
Well, I mean, I think that the reason that Ukraine hasn't done better in the war, why it's reached this impasse, is because the Western countries didn't supply it with enough weaponry to win, just to hold the Russians off and reach this status quo. And if we'd gone a bit further, they would have had the opportunity to do that. At the moment, according to the Telegraph, Russian forces are firing 5 times more shells than Ukraine per day. There was a story in the Telegraph just the other day about this big gun that this Ukrainian soldier had, really rocket launcher, and no rockets to launch with it. And I think it's very wise for Britain to begin to rearm. We're rearming, really, not just Ukraine, but ourselves. Our own armed forces are so depleted that we offer very little deterrent to Putin or anybody else. The armed forces are the smallest since the Napoleonic Wars. Grant Shapps last week was in a submarine that misfired a missile that plopped into the sea off the coast of America. And if we don't do that, then we are risking war. You know, as the ancient saying goes, in order to prepare for war, prevent war, you have to prepare for it.
Do you think there was a miscalculation at the start? Because at the beginning of the war, the narrative was very much that it will be over in a few days. And as Jake was saying, that perhaps they weren't armed enough at the start to actually win.
It didn't feel to me, I think the reason people thought it was going to be over in a few days when it first started was because they didn't think the Ukrainians would put a fight up. So I think that's the surprise, really. There was a kind of, I think you're right, probably a slightly defeatist, pre-defeatist attitude when Russia first invaded. Everybody was very appalled, but nobody was really expecting Ukraine to hold out. And nobody really had a plan for how to support and defend Ukraine, because obviously that's quite a big decision. That involves going to war with Russia at some point.
I mean, nobody believed that Russia was going to invade. Do you remember when the forces were building up, people were saying, no, 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 then it's just saber-rattling. And when it happened, there was an extraordinary moment where Zelensky did that video saying, I don't want to ride out of the country, I want weapons, I want arms, I'm staying here. And from that moment, we did pull behind Ukraine. The Ukraine flags appeared all over Britain and other countries as well. But the appetite's been lost a little bit, and my worry is that if Trump comes back into the White House at the end of this year, he might pull support from Ukraine to a drastic degree, which would really sink them and us, essentially.
Let's turn to the Mirror and this first-hand account of the people living in Ukraine and just really saying that they still have belief in their allies to help them. But Zoe, as Jake's pointed out, potentially, you know, America could withdraw support. We've got the problem at the moment with Congress not releasing the billions in aid, and their support and appetite for supporting Ukraine seems to be waning.
It's really tragic, because I think exactly as we've established, there was the realities of a land war really weren't considered at all before Russia invaded, and they weren't really considered that much in the first 6 months of the invasion. It was because it's such an unfamiliar site, the tactics are so unfamiliar. There was a lot of almost the coverage seemed quite light-hearted. Everybody was laughing about Russian tanks getting stuck in the mud because they hadn't been used for so long, and all their rubber was degraded. Actually, what we're getting this weekend, because of the 2-year anniversary, is a lot of first-hand accounts of what it's like to live in a war zone, and it's really devastating. And I would be surprised if there isn't some concerted European response, although I would also be surprised, of course, if we were part of it. But yeah, I mean, the main worry is Trump getting in. But there's a lot of dove talk in Europe as well, because there are major players in the EU who do not want to be involved in a war.
It's important also to recognise that Ukraine hasn't just given up and isn't doing badly. I mean, even though there's been quite a lot of coverage about Russia retaking the city called Avdiivka, spelt with 2 I's really in the middle, and that cost 17,000 Russian lives to take it. It's a very small place, but it's symbolically and strategically important. Ukraine has withdrawn from that, but at a very high cost to the Russians. Ukraine has destroyed about 1/5 of the Russian fleet off Mariupol. And the grain is starting to flow again. So there's been lots of reasonable gains for Ukraine. You just feel that if there was a bit more determination from the West to give them the backing they need, then they'd be able to see off Putin, and that would establish a precedent that would mean that Putin wouldn't be emboldened to then push the envelope further with NATO countries, which is the real fear.
And that's why Lord Cameron's saying this evening that the support mustn't falter.
Exactly.
It must continue. Let's have a look at this story in the Mirror. This is the former Post Office chief, Paula Reynolds, who's been officially stripped of her CBE by the King.
Well, of course, she handed it back a month ago, and she may have hoped that would, A, kind of, forestall this rather humiliating headline, that she would be stripped of it, and B, would maybe take the heat off her for a little bit in the kind of post-mortem. Actually, that hasn't happened at all. There are stories breaking every day about what she knew and what she didn't know, and what emails she got in 2014 but then denied having had in 2015. So I think she's in for a long kind of sustained public jobbing, really. I can't see anybody giving over, partly because until the sub-postmasters are kind of justice has been served and they've got compensation, everybody's still really seethingly angry, and there aren't many kind of recognisable figures to be angry with but her.
That's really the point. I mean, she was stripped of this CBE after a petition of 1.2 million signatures called for it. But I think that, as the Mirror points out very aptly in its leader, it won't get sub-postmasters and mistresses their deserved compensation. And it's important that she's seen to be brought to justice. But at the same time, the compensation is really important as well. It mustn't be a distraction from that, because justice does need to be done across the board.
Yeah, it's way more,
Let's, before the break, let's have a look at the Daily Telegraph. And the Health Secretary apparently has indicated that she'll back the decriminalisation of abortion. Zoe?
A lot of MPs even are quite confused about abortion, because you've been able to have an abortion in this country, whatever your circumstances, on demand since 1967. And so they kind of assume that means it's already decriminalised, but it's actually still part of the criminal statute, and it's a kind of medical loophole that allows you to have one, where the doctor gives you two separate doctors have to testify that there's a risk to your life or health as the mother in order to get one, which it's an anomaly, and everybody just lives with it. But it does have consequences, such as there have been 80 prosecutions or investigations since 2016 into women who've lost late pregnancies, into whether or not they were trying to procure their abortion. And if they've been successfully prosecuted, which none but 4 were, they would have faced life in prison. So it's majorly consequential, whether it's in the criminal statutes or not. And Victoria Atkins is clearly very keen to take it out. But, of course, it's a free vote on abortion, so it doesn't matter really what the Health Secretary says.
And Jake, just very quickly, just to clarify, this is to decriminalise abortion after 24 weeks.
No, it's completely to decriminalise it, but at the moment it's...
That's one of the amendments, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's one to bring it down to 22 weeks as well, but I don't think that's going to...
Yes, limit from 24 weeks to 22 weeks. We have run out of time on this section, so we're going to take a break. Coming up, find out what the Get Well cards have been lifting, how the Get Well cards have been lifting the King's spirits. Stay with us.
So when animals have been in captivity for so long, they're used to being fed. They're in a safe indoor environment. So it's quite like anyone. It's a big adaptation to sort of. There are a lot of external factors to be introduced to. So, for example, where the whales are, there are things like weather conditions, tides, different flora and fauna. So all of these external factors, they can vary the pace at which an animal can adjust.
My memory is that our cameraman, Ed, would put his waterproof camera down in the water, and one of these things would just come up and nuzzle it with their nose. They were the most extraordinarily curious, innocent creatures, but you also felt that made them very, very vulnerable.
Yeah, so beluga whales are very, very sociable creatures, very, very curious as well. You can hear them, they communicate via whistles and clicks. They are vulnerable, especially to human threats, things like pollution, fishing activity, noise pollution. These animals are naturally inquisitive, so they'll want to find out what these things are. So the fact that they'll, potentially be in this outdoor care sanctuary is a great way to keep them in a sort of more natural environment. So in the UK, there are no whales in captivity. And I think as, we've got this drive at the moment where marine conservation in particular is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So people are becoming more aware of the situation. So numbers are gradually coming down, yes. So sanctuaries such as this are a great place for animals that have been in captivity to potentially go to retire and to be in a more sort of natural environment. It's sort of like a crossover between being indoors and being outdoors where they're naturally found.
Welcome back. Here watching the press preview. Still with me, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, and Guardian columnist Zoe Williams. Let's have a look at the front of the Mirror. Their headline, King and Tonic. We sort of see what they've done with that. Basically, the King's reading all the cards that he's received, wishing him well following his cancer diagnosis. Zoe.
I mean, he obviously touched a nerve, didn't he? Because 7,000 cards is a non-trivial. I know.
He touched a nerve. People love him.
I know, people do love him, and and they genuinely wish him well. It's a non-trivial number of well wishes. That 7,000, and he should be pleased with it.
Especially as nobody sends cards anymore. Everyone sends emails.
Well, maybe the
can't really
royalists.
Email the king, though, can you?
You can't email the king. That's true.
Do you think he has an email address?
He probably does. That goes to a press secretary. But also, what's probably different is that you could never imagine the Queen, his late mother, in this situation, because you never really knew very much about her health. So I suppose that's the big difference.
Exactly. I mean, she could have had she could have had multiple life-threatening diseases over her 96 years. You absolutely wouldn't have a clue. So yeah, no, I mean, he certainly kind of heralds a new openness, and I think people have experienced it as a sort of caring custodian motivation, because his kind of message has been always check your prostate.
Apparently he's been moved to tears by the cards as well. So it's not just a one-way street. And you've thought that, having been in that position for such long, obviously for his entire life, but you'd have kind of got used to receiving lots and lots of mail. But it seems like he really was moved by it. So if any viewers here sent one in, know that it was well received by him.
Yes. And as you say, Zoe, it has encouraged a lot of people to actually be tested, and it's brought, the cancer sufferers to the fore, and made people more aware.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's quite a thing for the King to be so open about such a private matter.
Yes.
So, I mean, it would be surprising to me if the impact hadn't been significant.
Finally, to the Star. Is this our national dish now? Apparently, the roast is out.
Story of the day.
And the spag bowl is in.
I mean, I don't want to offend any Italians, obviously. But this is, well, it's not, I mean, obviously I'll eat anything, but I'm just saying this is a much more simple dish than this.
Well, I've got to say, I feel
what's more simple?
Spaghetti bolognese. So, like, if my son brought a girlfriend home and she could make spaghetti bolognese, but she couldn't make Yorkshire puddings, I'd be like, meh. Maybe the next one.
I feel very torn about it, because I feel very sad that the roast is apparently, according to the Start, on the way out. But at the same time, I myself would rather go for a spaghetti bolognese over a roast. So
if you were in a pub on a Sunday afternoon, you would say, "I'll have the spaghetti bolognese."
In certain circumstances, I'm not anti-roast. I don't want to become a hate figure. But I find it a bit much sometimes, a bit overwhelming. It's huge and it's sort of a bit intimidating.
Yeah, it requires more skill, though, doesn't it, roast? Zoe and Jake, for the moment, thank you very much. We'll see you in the 11 o'clock hour. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, after an exceptionally mild month so far, temperatures are back to near normal, making it feel on the cold side this weekend. It'll be a chilly start to Saturday morning with the risk of frost, icy patches and some freezing fog where winds have fallen light. However, it remains windy and showery towards the southwest. Any overnight fog patches will lift to sunny skies on Saturday.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.